Hi everyone, and welcome to Synerga TV with me, Rich Gibbons. And today I am once again joined by the excellent David Shields, CEO of Value Match. Thank you very much for joining us again, David.
It's a pleasure, Rich.
Always good to talk. So today we're talking about sustainability, which is a huge topic. Whether you call it sustainability, green ops, cloud green ops, but also kind of looking at sustainability through a kind of procurement lens, which is I think quite interesting. And obviously, given your background and current role, in procurement, the insights from your side will be very interesting. So for me, sustainability is a huge area. It covers, on premises, hardware, SaaS software, cloud. So I guess starting point, for you, when you think sustainability, kind of what does it mean to you?
God, that is a big question. So fast forward for an hour, and then I'm sure we'll have the answer. I think if we take a step back, so for me, procurement is at the heart of the challenge around sustainability, but also things like human rights and inequality. If you really take a step back and think about the impact of the planet over the last, if you look over 500 years, 1,000 years, the last 40 years has seen greater impact on the climate than at any time in our history outside of catastrophic events, one-off events. So, and that's really being driven by consumption, and whether we're consuming as individuals or as organizations, everything we buy has an impact on the planet, and a lot of those impacts are relatively negative and from a climate perspective. So, what we buy, how often we buy it, how much we buy, and who we buy it from is going to have a significant impact on, or potential impact on the planet. And we should think carefully about all of those aspects when we make any buying decision. And frankly, that's whether you go to the supermarket and decide to buy a fresh fruit salad that's being flown all over the world because it's got bits and pieces from everywhere, to computers, to services, full stop. So for me, procurement's right at the crux of the issue around sustainability, and is a really big lever for change, and if organizations and individuals choose to use it.
That is a fascinating sort of look at procurement's role, and there's some parts that I'd never really considered, and interesting. Yeah, you do that thing, with, like you say, when you go shopping, whether you buy, certain types of tuna or whatever it might be, but to kind of sort of put that onto a corporate procurement role, it isn't something I'd necessarily thought about. But now you've said it, it's probably, the potential for change is even greater.
If you think about it, I know this is IT, but let's do something that everybody knows. So when I pop to the local supermarket, my wife likes a fresh fruit salad, right? So you get that. So think about it very logically. You've got different fruit components. God, I sound like a real techie there, don't I? But you've got stuff coming in from every different part of the world to make that salad. You've had people who pick it, quite often not paid decent wages. There's human rights issues and so on and so forth. It's picked, it's packed, it's shipped. It's shipped from lots of different places around the world. It's consolidated. It's got plastic, quite often single-use plastics in those containers. It's stored, it's refrigerated. So those individual pieces of fruit are being flown all over the world, and then they're consolidated, and then they're still shipped into the supermarket, probably being injected with some stuff to keep it sort of as fresh as possible for the person who uses it. So just think about the carbon footprint of that. Or you could buy apples from your local farmer.
Yeah.
So, like, they're the choices we've got, and we all make less than perfect decisions based on what we like and what's appropriate, what we can afford, and so on and so forth. But if we look at it from a pure sustainability lens, just go and eat some apples or whatever the fresh fruit is in season at that moment. But that footprint is enormous, and I think, you know, and we're going to probably talk about servers and data centers. Well, think of the complexity of every single component in those areas, and where they're being manufactured and shipped from, and what the energy usage is, and so on and so forth. So these are complex areas, but we can, as individuals, make, and as organizations, make better decisions than we probably are at the moment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think, you know, where you mentioned kind of computer hardware there. You know, I remember reading something, I forget where, but something like 80% of the carbons related to a laptop come before it's created. So, you know, the digging up of the rare metals and all that kind of thing. So, you know, from an IT asset management perspective, you know, on the hardware side, just looking at something like hardware refresh rates. You know, if you currently refresh your laptops every 3 years, just because that's what you do, you know, that means every 3 years there's another 10,000, 50,000, whatever laptops that need to be, you know, dug up and created. So even just extending your life cycle can help, and I guess that's something that procurement would take part in.
So it's a really interesting point. I think in general, part of procurement's role should be about managing demand. It's about matching the demand side to the supply side. So one of the key questions that all procurement people should be asking is not necessarily, should I go to market and go and buy 1,000 of X? It should be, do we need to buy 1,000 of X, or is there a different route, a different approach to fulfill that demand? And is there a more economical or a less impactful, if we're looking through a sustainability lens? Is there a better service outcome that I can get through maybe taking a different view of it? You know, so almost like you could equate that to on-prem and cloud decision making, and so on and so forth, right? So the whole demand side should be a real question that procurement is saying, how best do we meet that demand, and not automatically assume we should renew anything. Actually ask those fundamental questions. In terms of that IT hardware, I mean, I think we all know, and we've all worked in organizations. I think I worked in an organization, I had 3 new laptops in 6 months because of various changes, and it's completely wasteful. And we talk about it's really interesting about the carbon footprint, but also the water footprint of manufacturing is actually enormous. I think it's something like 9,000 litres or something per laptop. It's absolutely enormous when you take out the extraction of minerals. So if you think about the extraction of cobalt, for example, there's also modern slavery issues in terms of cobalt and child slave labour in commingled supply chains. So one of the things we talk about when we're delivering our services is, we can't necessarily impact all of the supply chain from, say, extraction of minerals in a laptop, but what we can do is extend the life of what you've already got by using remanufactured, refurbished, or just literally extending the life of a piece of equipment, or using maybe using that equipment elsewhere in the organization. So if it's slightly older, are there users within the organization who are less demanding on the capabilities of that particular piece of equipment, therefore you can extend the life of it, and so on and so forth. By doing that, one, we're obviously saving significant sums of money potentially, which is helpful. We are also limiting the impact that we have on supply chains and sustainability. So I think it's a really fundamental question around, you know, the amount of equipment you're buying or services you're buying. Do you really need it, and are you maximizing it and optimizing it?
That's a great point. And I suppose, you know, nowadays, sustainability and the concerns as well, like you mentioned about human rights violations and things as well, are probably more of a concern to more people than ever before, generally. And with sustainability, it's something we see when organizations are looking to, hire new staff, trying to win new customers. Their approach to human rights and sustainability and things is something that people are looking at. So I guess for organizations, we're perhaps not quite at that point yet for many of them, but there will come a point where, from a procurement perspective, you need to weigh up kind of cost versus sustainability, and something. It's probably the case that the less sustainable it is, the cheaper it is. So is that something that the organisations need to consider?
So there is a growing set of legislation and policies globally that are driving significant changes, and I would say that the EU is further ahead on this than most parts of the world in terms of legislation, but also things like Canada, New Zealand, Australia. You've got the Supply Chain Act in Germany, which places obligations on organizations of a certain size, and that if they've got human rights violations, or if they've got anti-dumping mechanisms or poor sustainability track record, that they're liable to be found. I think it's something like 4% of global revenues if they don't take corrective action. So there's a real complex panoply of sort of legislation, and then underpinning that, different policies. We see this through procurement. So procurement is right at the front line of this, where there's obligations being put on supply chains to demonstrate their sustainability capabilities, and what approaches are they taking to get to net zero by certain deadlines. UK government's got a whole set of policies. The NHS are particularly forward looking in this area at the moment around sustainability as well, about net zero obligations that they're putting in place. So the directional side of this I think is really clear, and most organizations are taking steps to comply with these obligations through procurement, and quite often they're scored, they're part of the evaluation process. Right. And certainly, as we're suppliers to some organizations, and we have to confirm our approach to sustainability. We don't have a massive supply chain, so the human rights issue is we do some reporting on that, but our impact is really small. So I think on that side of it, the obligations are very clear. The interesting thing about the trade-offs between cost and sustainability or not sustainability, I think, is quite a complex question, and I don't think it's quite as clear-cut as if it's more sustainable, therefore it's more expensive. I think it's really mixed. So I tend to look at spend as, say, 100% of expenditure in an organization, rather than just on a project by project basis. So I think if you're looking and making decisions on an individual project, then certainly some projects are likely to have a higher cost to have a sustainable alternative, just because it's either more expensive to manufacture, it's more expensive to acquire the energy, because there'll be a demand and supply imbalance. But if you raise it up a level and say, my job is to manage expenditure holistically, if we go back to the example of, I'm not renewing my equipment now on a 3-year cycle, it's a 5-year cycle or a 6-year cycle. If you then look at those trade-offs, then I think it becomes far more nuanced as to whether it actually costs the organization more money or less money. So, again, the trade-off between running your own on-prem data center or using a cloud-based solution that you can dial up or down and so on and so forth, and that you've got the ability to tap into scale, I think is these are slightly, I think, the more nuanced questions. But on a project by project basis, yes, sometimes there's going to be an increased cost. There might be an increased cost to compliance, for example.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, actually. Yeah, looking at it holistically across the whole business, some bits will be more expensive, other bits will be cheaper. So if you manage that overall number, the picture may look different. And I think that's probably, I think the best way to do it for most things. Looking organisation wide rather than just at this project or that project. It's probably easier said than done, but it should be where people are aiming for.
Well, I think there's also an opportunity cost, right? So if you've got, and we work for a couple of big multinationals, and they've put certain obligations around carbon neutrality. So we've been carbon neutral for 4 and a bit years, and that's basically, can we reduce? I mean, we're super small, so it's not like that. I wouldn't want to say that we've done anything outstanding really, but we've tried to reduce the amount we travel, where we use refurbished laptops and so on and so forth. And then with all the issues with offsetting, we offset what's left because I can't reduce it anymore. So there's only so many things we can do to limit our usage. But what we're able to do is then demonstrate that we get independent certification over what we've done, and we're not marking our own work, etc., etc., etc. Now, we're obligated to report that for certain contracts. So if you're an organisation and you're not taking these steps, then there's an opportunity cost of, well, you're not going to be able to be part of some of these supply chains because these suppliers now have objectives and targets as well as governments and so on and so forth. So you've got to take that into account. And frankly, there's just a moral point here, is like really we're not going to take action. We all know the science and we can see what's happening. And if you read and you open your eyes, it's difficult in the UK because we're not impacted to anywhere near the same extent. But just some basic research and awareness. We have a moral obligation because we're the consumers. And all of the noise about, well, it's India and China that's creating all of the global warming. Well, what are they creating? Who for? Because to the best of my knowledge, it ain't lots of people in India who are consuming the products, or China that are consuming the products that are being manufactured. It's us consuming the products. It's our carbon footprint. It just happens to be made somewhere else. So I think we have a moral obligation to try and minimize that sort of our negative impact on the planet, whether that's sustainability or whether that's human rights abuses and so on and so forth. So there's a number of factors, but it doesn't cost a lot. It just takes a bit of time, focus and effort and a bit of strategy.
Yeah, again, I completely agree. And I think, most people on an individual basis, are doing things about sustainability, recycling, etc., etc. And it's remembering, to do that when you're within the business. And a business is nothing but a collection of people. So if we're doing it as individuals, we should be doing it as organisations. And yeah, and I think the opportunity cost is really interesting. So as you said, you might miss out on opportunities from a business perspective, but also you might miss out on a segment of customers, or you might miss out on hiring some absolutely wonderful young people because your values don't line up. So I think we've covered quite a lot, and I think we will as an industry, as people will be talking about this a lot for the next few years at least. But I think we've given people some really good things to think about. And if for those of you watching, if it is something that you're concerned about, working internally to implement some of these ideas, to raise it up at board meetings, annual general shareholder meetings, etc. I think it, as you said, David, the moral imperative for everyone to do something, and also finding the business value as well, and then it's a win-win really. So thank you for those insights, and like I say, I'm sure we'll talk about this again in the future. But as always, pleasure to talk to you. and I look forward to the next one.
Great to catch up. Thanks, Rich.